There comes a quiet moment in life when the clock starts sounding different. Not louder, not faster, just more honest. And in that moment, something unexpected happens. The things we once believed mattered above all else begin to lose their weight. Not because we failed at them, not because we grew bitter, but because time, when it feels limited, tells the truth without raising its voice. Most people assume that as the years pass, we cling harder to our opinions, our achievements, our regrets. That aging is a tightening of the grip, but lived experience whispers something else entirely. It says that what truly changes is not the strength of our hands, but the clarity of our sight. You begin to notice how many of your worries were borrowed, how many battles were fought for applause that faded before you even reached home. How often you carried anger like proof of strength, only to realize later it was just weight. Unnecessary, exhausting weight. There's a moment, sometimes in a hospital room, sometimes alone at the kitchen table, when a simple thought arrives without drama. So much of what troubled me never asked to be carried this far. And with that thought comes a surprising relief. Not sadness, not fear, relief. It's not that life becomes smaller, it becomes truer. The noise falls away, and what remains feels strangely familiar, like something you knew once but forgot in the rush to become someone. This is not about giving up. It's about seeing clearly, and once you see it, you can't quite unsee it. For most of our lives, we are taught, quietly, persistently, that happiness is something we must secure, protect, hold tightly. As if joy were fragile glass, always at risk of slipping from our hands. We learn to measure our worth by how much we endure, how much we accumulate, how much we can prove to others and often to ourselves. And so we hold on to roles that no longer fit, to stories about who wronged us, to versions of ourselves that once worked, but now only ask for maintenance. We call this perseverance. We call it responsibility. Few of us recognize it as fear wearing respectable clothing. What time reveals, gently without accusation, is that much of our exhaustion comes not from living, but from gripping, from refusing to loosen what has already served its purpose. Happiness was never meant to be held like a possession. It moves more like breath. When we clutch it, it disappears. When we allow it to pass through us, it stays longer. Aging is often misunderstood because we frame it as loss, loss of strength, loss of relevance, loss of control. But there is another way to see it, one that only experience can teach. Aging is a refinement, a gradual release of what was never essential to begin with. Letting go does not mean forgetting, excusing, or denying. It means understanding the difference between what shaped you and what still deserves a seat at the table of your inner life. Some things belong to memory, not to the present moment. And when this distinction becomes clear, something shifts, not suddenly, not dramatically, but steadily, like a weight being set down after a very long walk. From here, the reflections begin to unfold naturally, one by one. What no longer matters, the need to be right. There was a time when being right felt essential. Not just important, essential. As if clarity, dignity, even safety depended on proving a point. You remember the conversations that stretched too long, the tension in the chest, the rehearsed arguments played over and over, long after the other person had stopped listening. It often happened with the people closest to us, family, old friends, sometimes even strangers who crossed our path for only a moment, yet stayed with us for days because something felt unresolved. We told ourselves it mattered, that the truth needed defending, that silence would mean surrender. But time has a way of softening the edges of certainty. You begin to notice how rarely being right actually brought peace, how victory in words often left behind a quiet loneliness. The room would go still, and even if you'd won, something unseen had been lost. There comes a subtle shift, usually unnoticed at first, when you realize that understanding feels better than agreement, that being heard matters more than being correct, and that some truths don't need witnesses to remain true. Letting go of the need to be right doesn't mean abandoning your values. It means trusting them enough not to armor them. It means choosing connection over correction, rest over resolution. In that release, the body relaxes. Conversations breathe again, and you discover a gentler strength, one that doesn't raise its voice, yet carries far less weight inside. Peace often arrives not when the argument ends, but when the argument is no longer needed. What no longer matters. Old grievances that never age with us. Some hurts have a way of traveling with us, quietly, patiently. They don't announce themselves every day, but they never fully leave the room. A comment made decades ago, a betrayal that was never explained, a moment when someone should have stood up for us and didn't. For a long time, we keep these memories close, not because they feel good, but because they feel familiar. They become part of how we understand ourselves, proof that something happened, proof that our pain was real. Letting go can feel like erasing evidence. You may notice how certain names still tighten the chest, how a single sentence can pull you back into a version of yourself who had fewer choices, fewer words. We tell ourselves we've moved on, yet the body remembers before the mind can object. But time introduces a quiet question. What if this pain has already done all the work it came to do? Not to justify what happened, not to excuse it, only to recognize that its role in shaping us may be complete. Holding on to old grievances doesn't preserve the past, it replays it. And each replay asks the present to pay a price it never agreed to. Letting go is not an act of generosity toward those who hurt us. It's an act of mercy toward ourselves. When we loosen our grip on what no longer needs guarding, something unexpected opens. Space, breath, a sense that the heart can finally rest its watch. Peace, it turns out, is not forgetting. It's remembering without bleeding. What no longer matters, proving our worth. For many years, worth felt like something that had to be demonstrated, through effort, through sacrifice, through being useful, reliable, strong. We learned early that appreciation often arrived after exhaustion, not before it. So we kept going, doing more, giving more. Saying yes long after the body quietly asked for rest. There's a familiar scene that plays out across a lifetime, sitting at a table where others speak freely while you listen carefully, measuring your words, or waking up already tired, not from lack of sleep, but from the unspoken pressure to justify your place in the world once again. Proving our worth can become so habitual that we forget it was ever a choice. We call it responsibility. We call it love. And sometimes it is, but over time, it can turn into a quiet negotiation with life itself. If I give enough, perhaps I'll finally be allowed to rest. Then comes a moment, often late, but always honest, when the question arises, who would I be if I stopped performing my value? The answer is unsettling at first, and then strangely freeing. You begin to sense that worth was never something earned. It was something carried, quietly, invisibly, even in moments when no one noticed, even when nothing was accomplished. Letting go of the need to prove ourselves doesn't make us smaller. It returns us to a simpler truth, that being here is already enough. And in that realization, effort softens into presence. Peace arrives when we no longer audition for belonging. What no longer matters, the stories we tell about how life should have been. There is a quiet grief that comes not from what happened, but from what didn't. The life we imagined, the turn we thought we'd take, the version of ourselves that existed so clearly in the mind, yet never quite arrived in the world. For years, these unseen paths walk beside us, whispering comparisons we never asked for. It often shows up in small moments, watching someone younger succeed where we once hoped to, returning to a place that feels different now, opening an old photograph and thinking, I thought life would open wider from here. We tell ourselves these stories to make sense of time, to explain why certain doors closed, to justify the weight of disappointment. But slowly, we begin to notice how these narratives keep us standing in a doorway that no longer exists. Time, when listened to closely, offers another perspective. It reminds us that a life is not a straight line meant to reach a single destination. It is a landscape, and not every meaningful place is visible from the main road. Letting go of how life should have been doesn't require pretending everything was perfect. It only asks us to stop measuring the present against a future that never learned how to breathe. When we release these imagined versions, the current moment steps forward, imperfect, yes, but real. And real life, even now, still has room to surprise us gently. Peace grows when we stop arguing with the shape our life took and start listening to what it's offering now. What no longer matters. the fear of being alone. With ourselves, for much of life, silence can feel uncomfortable. We fill it with conversation, responsibility, noise. We stay busy not always because we must, but because stillness brings us face to face with parts of ourselves we were never taught how to sit with. There is a familiar restlessness that appears when the house grows quiet, when the phone doesn't ring, when no one is asking anything of us. In those moments, we may feel oddly unanchored, as if usefulness were the only proof that we exist. But with time, something subtle begins to change. The same silence that once felt heavy starts to feel spacious. You notice the rhythm of your own breathing, the way light moves across the room, the fact that your presence does not disappear when no one is watching. Being alone is not the same as being abandoned, yet it takes years to truly feel the difference. The fear often comes from an old belief that without constant exchange, we might fade, that without reflection in others' eyes, we might lose shape. Letting go of this fear opens a door to an unexpected companionship. You begin to recognize yourself not as a problem to be solved, but as a presence to be kept company with. No performance required, no explanations needed. And in that quiet meeting, peace no longer feels like something distant. It sits beside you, patient, familiar. When you step back and look at what has slowly fallen away, a pattern begins to appear, not one of loss, but of refinement. Like a room that has been lived in for decades, finally cleared of what was never used, never loved, never needed to be carried this far. Life grows quieter, not because there is less in it, but because the unnecessary commentary has faded. The urge to defend, to replay, to prove, to rewrite, it loosens its hold, and in that loosening, something steady takes its place. You begin to notice how simple moments carry more weight now. A shared glance, a familiar voice, the warmth of morning light on tired hands. None of these needed improvement. They only needed space. Peace, it turns out, was never hiding behind some final achievement. It wasn't waiting at the end of endurance. It was always here, obscured by accumulation. Too many expectations, too many internal negotiations. Too many stories insisting that more effort would finally make things whole. Letting go does not empty life. It clarifies it. Like cleaning a window you didn't realize had grown cloudy, you see what was always outside, waiting without urgency. When time feels limited, priorities don't shrink, they sharpen. What remains is what matters. Not because it shouts, but because it stays. And in this stillness, there is no rush, no unfinished argument with existence. Just the quiet understanding that subtracting wisely is its own form of wisdom. And now, in the softer light of what remains, a few questions drift in, not demanding answers, only honesty. What would it feel like to set down the last thing you've been carrying out of habit rather than love? What part of your life has been patiently waiting for your attention, not your effort? When you imagine peace, does it arrive as something to reach for or something to return to? Perhaps there are moments you can already sense it, in the pauses between thoughts, in the quiet satisfaction of having nothing left to prove, in the realization that your life, exactly as it unfolded, still knows how to hold meaning. There is no final lesson here, no closing statement that ties everything neatly. Life was never meant to be wrapped up so cleanly. It leaves threads loose, questions unanswered, spaces where memory and presence meet. Maybe the invitation is simply this: to notice what no longer asks for your energy, and what still does, to listen, without urgency, to what feels lighter when released. And if you feel moved to reflect, or to share what time has gently taught you, those stories matter, not as conclusions, but as quiet echoes, reminders that we are not alone in this gradual, tender letting go. The rest can remain open.